This episode of Deep in the Weeds is proudly supported by Olsen Salt, Australia's oldest family-owned salt company.
If anyone thought the pandemic was bad, I actually feel this feels worse a little bit. Yes, we're open. Yes, there's money coming through, but it is tough, man. Like, I think the staffing issue is the biggest pressure for all of us.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. When we think of restaurants, cafes, and pubs, we often think of standalone businesses run by families with its own identity. But there are many hospitality groups across Australia with large teams trained with an ability to deliver the magic in multiple venues with very different offerings. What does it take to deliver the right systems, find the right identity, offering, and experience across numerous establishments? Telina Menzies is the Executive Chef and Business Development Manager of Australian Venue Co. Telina, how are you going?
I'm good, Huck.
Thanks for joining us. You look after so many venues, I probably can't even count them. Can you give us a sort of indication of how big your role is?
I can't even count them either, to be honest. I do forget when people ask. So I'm currently running 30 venues, about 15 here in Vic. I do WA, which has got 7, and I've just taken on a few in regional New South Wales and border towns in Victoria. So one I actually opened this week. Wow.
So given you're the executive chef and also business development manager for food operations, what does it take for your role? What does it consist of?
I'm really there for ops support. So, if we take on a new business, I'll sort of hire the staff, redo menus and look at the sort of brand and what the target market is for the venue and sort of write menus to suit that and sort of employ the staff. And then ongoing, I'm really there just for support of the head chef. So really making sure they have the tools to do the job week on week and just support them and mentor them to be able to do what we need them to do. Our staff is our biggest asset. You can have, the best equipment, the best venues, but without a team behind me, then it's very challenging.
Can you give us a sense of how different the venues are and how you treat a particular venue and the location it's in to sort of create the menu and the offering?
Yeah, well, I in my portfolio, in particular, I've got anywhere from, O'Connell's in South Melbourne, which is, one of the best, and oldest sort of gastro pubs. It's quite a iconic venue that's seen a lot of, really amazing chefs come through it. So that was quite stressful to be, managing something like that with, the likes of, Greg Maloof and stuff having gone through the venue. And then, I've got Trinket, a small cocktail bar, that does pizza. I've got, some really big football pubs and sporting pubs like, the Duke of Wellington, Crafty Squire. They all have, it's very important for us that they all have their own identity and that the offering is different. We definitely don't want to be, the McDonald's of the hospitality industry, cookie cutter menus. So it is quite challenging to make sure that the offers are different, especially when you're sort of trying to inspire your chefs and make sure that the menus aren't the same. It's probably one of the biggest challenges.
Chefs often get asked what their food is like. And given that your role is to create experiences in multiple, very different venues in very different locations, what's the challenges for you from a culinary perspective?
Yeah, it is very challenging. I feel like I have to be good at everything, and I'm definitely not. When I started out my career, I've done lots of stuff, and if you had have talked to the 10 years ago, Telina, I wanted to, cook around the world and Michelin star and had restaurants, and now I'm doing pubs. That's the core of our business, and that's what we do. And I've had to really, pivot and change the way that I cook, depending on each venue. But I do find that the staff look at me to be some kind of a, culinary god sometimes, but I'm definitely not good at everything. But I have to learn, and I have to think, quickly on my feet, and take a lot of time to read and educate myself as well.
The group is involved in some pretty amazing gastropubs across the country, and you mentioned that one just launched in the last week. Tell us about that venue and the food that's offering and what it took to put that together in the current climate.
It was very challenging. So it was a Criterion Hotel out in Yarrawonga. And it's a really beautiful pub. So it was pretty much a turnkey project. So we just gave it a little bit of love, and put a smoker out on the deck, and the most challenging part was finding a team. And I think that's everybody's challenge in the industry at the moment is staffing, especially regional. We just cannot find staff for hell or high water. So that was very challenging. I took one of my other senior chefs out with me to do that project. I don't think I've cooked so hard in the last few years. I was on a section because we just didn't have enough staff. So trying to manage, a million phone calls and run a pizza section at the same time, that was fun. But yeah, it's definitely a challenge. Staffing is probably the biggest challenge for all of us.
What's the offering that you've put into that venue?
It's just very much a pub, steaks, parmas, good fish and chips. We've got really great pizzas. Very simple. We're going to do a great Sunday roast, just nothing out of the ordinary for what the town needs. I think one of the challenges is, staying true to the residents. There's 8,000 people there that live there, and, they have 100,000 come through for the holidays, which are all from Melbourne and regional Melbourne and New South Wales. So trying to cater to both markets is quite difficult.
You mentioned that you don't want to be the cookie cutter sort of operation in the hospitality industry, and you really focus on creating something at a particular location that suits the location. How important in regards to the food offering local producers for each venue and the sort of produce that you guys deal with? We,
as a big group, we obviously have contracts, and we try to sort of streamline our supply chain. During COVID especially, we sort of looked at our suppliers, and we had hundreds across the group in all categories. So we've really tried to, streamline our procurement and our buying, because we wanted to make sure we could pay our bills was really important for us, and that making sure that was in check. But, in each state we definitely have local suppliers, and we try and support that as much as possible.
Has it been interesting to see how important the local pub has become to local communities during the last year? Absolutely.
Especially the city has been extremely tough. I run a massive portfolio in their CBD, but definitely our suburban pubs have been, really busy, and the community's got behind us, and everything's about, support local, and we wouldn't be where we are today without the support of the local community. And we're definitely trying to put, a focus back on that. As much as possible, supporting local football clubs and sporting teams and stuff like that.
Most of the people that we've talked to have been, had a pretty tough year and been dealing with their local situation in suburb or city. But your role is over multiple states, and we've seen many border closures. What sort of impact has that had on your role and ability to make sure all of the operations are running smoothly?
I've spent most of my time on Zoom, which has been really difficult. I mean, I've got a lot of staff I haven't even got to meet in person, which sucks. But yeah, thank God for Zoom. But now things seem to be getting better, so I'm really looking forward to being able to get over to Western Australia, which is my hometown. I'm really missing the venues over there and my friends and family. So I haven't been back for over a year and a half now. So that'll be great.
You mentioned that you grew up in WA. Can you take us back to your early days and when food sort of became an interest for you?
Well, two of my uncles are actually chefs, and my father was a chef. So they told me not to bloody do it, but I did out of spite, as most kids do when they're told not to do something. So I did it. I started at the Hyatt back when five-star hotels were really, putting out some of the best food. So I trained over there at the Hyatt. I then went to the convention centre for quite a few years, where I was, running sort of big kitchen teams quite very young. I then moved over to London and worked over there for a couple of years, which was very eye-opening, especially as a female. It was pretty bloody tough, to be honest, but I didn't let that sort of knock me down. And then I came back to Perth, where I took on my first head chef role with the Publican Group, and then sort of went multi-venue, from there. And Perth, has always been home for me. They've been very supportive for me and definitely, put myself on the map a little bit over there, to where I got to a national executive chef role when I moved to Melbourne. So,
what was it like making that move from the hometown to Melbourne? Was it? Tell us about the experiences and changes in your life at that time.
Melbourne has always had a place in my heart. I think it's like I loved London, but it was bloody cold and miserable. And I went to work when it was dark and I came home when it was dark. But Melbourne is like a better version of that to me. And it's, it's busy. Well, it was busy, and it's such a great culinary scene, and there's so many people that I follow and inspire me, and to be able to live in it and be part of it was really special. I definitely had to grow, taking on, I think I took on 17 venues at that time, and I probably wasn't the best. I was very young when I first started my role, and I wasn't the best with people, and I was, used to yell and scream a lot, and I think that was to cover up my own insecurities and inability to do my role. But I definitely had to, with a massive team, working over both states, I definitely had to work on that, and I had some amazing people that helped me, supported me, and inspired me to just be a better human being. So it definitely made me grow and get me to where I am today.
You had the challenges of border closures and trying to run the operations of many businesses, but Melbourne's had more lockdowns than anywhere else in Australia over the last year. What was that period of time like for you personally?
It was pretty hard, to be honest. We had to stand down. I think it was like 1,200 staff.
Wow.
And I only had to sort of go into, 15 venues, I think, and do it. But coming home and just breaking down after, having to say, I'm sorry, but I don't know what's happening. You don't have a job anymore, and trying to deal with it within myself, but then take on the pressure and the weight of so many staff that you care about. It was horrible. It broke me.
Has that experience had an impact on the way you treat your role since?
Oh, for sure. People are, they're not the same anymore. It definitely has had an impact. I've seen it within myself. I've seen it within my team. Being almost institutionalized and locked away for 7 months definitely changes people. And then to be let out and it's all systems go and you've got to get back to it and going a million miles an hour, it definitely has an impact on your mental health. It was probably, sorry, the most challenging year, out of 22 years, the most challenging thing that I've had to deal with in my life. And it brought up a lot of demons within myself and a lot of things, that I had to deal with within myself, a lot of insecurities. I've always worked at a million miles an hour and probably, covered up, things that I've dealt with within my own mental health and insecurities by just chucking myself into work and going a million miles an hour and self-medicating. Having to stop, then everything was very raw and I had to kind of deal with that within myself as well.
How have you dealt with some of those demons that you talked of and what sort of positives have come out of facing that?
I think, obviously, like everyone else and all of my peers, I was like, what am I going to do? what do I do if I don't cook? I don't know anything else. Is what I've done since I was 17 years old. I'm not good at maths. I'm not good at anything else. I don't know anything else. And I had to really sort of take a good look at myself. I spent the first couple of weeks drinking a hell of a lot of, tequila and mezcal. And then I was like, I can't do this anymore. This is not helping. So I think for me, we wanted to try and support our staff, and we started cooking for our staff because, food security was the biggest concern for me. And I'm in a good job and I earn good money, but I was thinking I was freaking out about money, and I was thinking to myself, how are my staff going to survive? So we, with Australian Venue Co, we started cooking for our staff. We had a lot of support from our suppliers that were doing it tough as well. And we, at the end, I think we produced about 80,000 meals. And I sort of just shut myself into that because obviously I don't like to stand still, and I probably still haven't dealt with some of the demons, but I just had to throw myself into something to keep my mind occupied, and to keep my staff somewhat in work and to keep them creative and moving forward, so they weren't sitting there wondering, what am I doing with my life? So I sort of just threw myself into that and worked, 50, 60 hours on that project. And, we really wrapped ourselves around our staff, and that was a focus. It was probably the best time I've ever had in my career in terms of food, because I didn't have budgets to worry about. I didn't have the stress of, 30 venues calling me about problems, because the only time anyone ever calls me is if they have, a problem to deal with. Unfortunately, it's never a good, very, not often a good news story. But so yeah, I just threw myself into that, and that sort of made me think about what is next for me, because it made me feel so good. It just was so rewarding. I didn't have the pressures of everything else I have to deal with, and I just cooked every day. And it's the first time in 10 plus years that I haven't had multi-venues and problems to think about. And I was just cooking my arse off, and it was so nice.
This episode of Deep in the Weeds is proudly supported by Olsen Salt, makers of Australian sea salt since 1948.
The sea has given my family everything. My family harvests the pristine waters from the Great Australian Bight to make some of the best sea salt in the world. Hi, I'm Alex Olsen from Olsen Sea Salt. We are the oldest family-owned salt company in Australia. We took over the leases of Pacific Salt in Baruka on the Yorke Peninsula in the early 1960s. And then when the BHP salt leases in Whyalla became available, my father took those over as well. If anyone has visited Whyalla, know it's a very, very windy place. So the three things you need to make salt are seawater, wind and sun, and you get plenty of all three of those here. Wind is a really important factor in making good sea salt because it creates a greater surface area for the sun to evaporate the water, creating brine much faster. We take the seawater from Great Australian Bight and then we store it in something called a primary pond. Then it's fed through a succession of ponds from anywhere between 8 months and 2 years until it gets so heavy in brine and the water is evaporated off, the salt starts to fall out of the water, and it's as simple as that. That's all that we do, and then we wash it in seawater and package it.
For more information, go to olsens.com.au. You mentioned earlier the challenges of being a female in the industry early on in your career and the culture within hospitality. How do you go about creating a great culture within your group with so many venues and so many staff?
Culture is at the forefront of, what I try to lead with in my teams these days. When I started with the company, they didn't have much in place in terms of, from a cultural direction. And I am one of the culture sort of ambassadors for the group. So I really work heavily on, culture, programs for LGBTQI plus, making sure we have advanced women's program for the group. So we really focus on, pushing them forward and mentoring them to make sure, they're equal and they get all the opportunities the same as everybody else. So it's a massive focus for us.
You mentioned how you felt during this time cooking those meals for staff and made you rethink things, and you let go of a lot of the stresses of the job that you have. What is it that you love about cooking?
I love just getting lost in it, and that's what kind of it sucks about my role now is I've got so much that I'm thinking about at once. I just can't, get lost in it. And that's what first used to attracted me to cooking. I had quite a hard childhood. I had quite a hard past, as many. I'm not telling you a story that isn't uncommon. I'm not a victim. But, I had a pretty shitty past. And, when I got into the kitchen, I was, surrounded by people that were just like myself, and I just kind of got lost in what I was doing, and I would forget everything else in the world. And that's what, I love most about, when I was cooking for the staff, that nothing else mattered. It was just I was so invested in it that I would forget that there was a pandemic, and I would forget everything else that was going on in the world, and just got lost in food.
You mentioned the need to create menus specific to certain venues and locations, and meaning you have to know how to cook everything. But when you are cooking away from work, give us a sense of what your food is like.
I cook a lot at home, which is people find odd, but I don't really get to cook what I want when I'm at work. So if I have a really crappy day at work, I'll actually come home and cook. And that way I just sort of forget everything that's going on in the world. But I do just a lot of like nostalgia food. I mean, very wholesome. I smoke a lot of meat. And I do a lot of like slow braises. And that sort of comfort food. I went down a bit of a rabbit hole of sourdough in the pandemic. That was really got me for a while. I think most people did. It's like the Tamagotchi for adults, trying to keep that bloody thing alive. But that was probably causing me more stress than it was, relaxing. But I definitely, just cook from the heart. It's really nice not to use a recipe and just chuck whatever I've got in the pantry, and see how it comes out. And I don't have the pressure of somebody giving me a 1-star review if they don't like it.
You had a hard start. It's been a rough path to get to where you are. But what makes you proud of what you've achieved? I
guess just beating the odds. I was pretty naughty when I was a kid and had a pretty troubled past, but, coming out the other end of it when people didn't think I would, and being able to be here to sort of, nurture the younger generation. I think that's a big focus for me now, is to be able to sort of pay that forward. I had a beautiful man, even though people said, she's trouble, don't put her on the Australian culinary team, she's trouble. He sort of trusted in me, Patrick O'Brien, and he put me on the Australian culinary team, and we won medals, and that really sort of straightened me out and sort of put me on the right path to where I am today. So it's really something that I want to focus on. And like I said, when I was doing the meal program, I was thinking, this gives me so much joy. What do I want to do after being an executive chef? Because I'm kind of, you're always thinking what's next. And I think that would be a focus for me is youth, and, maybe even troubled youth, and putting them into kitchens, and trying to give them a bit of purpose and a bit of, structure and discipline, and hopefully put them on the right path.
You're involved with so many amazing venues across the country. How does the group identify new venues like the one you've just opened?
I think, unfortunately, the world we're living in at the moment, a lot of people, I'm very fortunate to come from a company that has, investors and money, but sadly, there's a lot of people out there that just, hospitality is so hard. You're trying to make $1 out of 50 cents, and people just aren't bouncing back from the pandemic. So, we're getting a lot of people approach us to get them out of the ship, basically, and take on their venues. So we're sort of looking at a lot of acquisitions at the moment. We obviously can't take them all on, but we'll definitely try to do what we can.
with all those amazing venues that you have, what does it take to create a great gastropub?
First and foremost, a great team. As I said before, your bricks and mortar are one thing, but a team, and that really is everything. But, simplicity, I think, is thinking about where I've, food trends and what's happened. I'm so glad to where sort of food is at now. It's really, the old school classic stuff is coming back. And food sort of, over the years it has lost its way, and people, I think, including myself, were just trying too hard to have something Instagram worthy and that was different. But I think it's really come back and there's nothing wrong with, a good bloody pie and a good sauce and a proper Paris mash and, a good steak with a good compound butter and sauce. I think not trying too hard is super important, and just good produce cooked simply, with a bit of love is the key.
It's been a pretty challenging year for so many in the industry, and the road ahead is still going to be pretty rough. How are you feeling about the next year or two with the industry and yourself and your role within it?
I think if anyone thought the pandemic was bad, I actually feel this feels worse a little bit. Yes, we're open. Yes, there's money coming through, but it is tough, man. Like, I think the staffing issue is the biggest pressure for all of us. Trying to get staff. I know that JobKeeper is coming to an end, so that should help. But we don't have any new staff coming through, which is causing, we're already overworked and sometimes underpaid, and then you've got to take all those pressures on as well. And I think that, that is exceptionally challenging for operators out there and chefs and front of house to deal with. And I think it's going to be a bloody hard road. So yes, the lockdown was hard and being isolated was hard, but I think for owner operators and for management, it's not getting any easier, and until we can sort of open up travel and have some more chefs and wait staff come through and the working holiday visas and the students coming back, I think it's going to continue to be bloody tough.
You mentioned the positive impact that getting back on the pans has had on you, and even in the last week you've had to run a section in the new venue. You just sort of briefly alluded to sort of wondering what's next for you. How are you feeling? What's your sense in regards to that?
I think, during COVID, you sort of sit there and you think, what am I doing with my life? Do I get job satisfaction out of this? And is my job causing me stress that I have to, drink 10 drinks after work to deal with the stress? So I think, for me, I have given it a lot of thought, but, getting back on the pans is definitely, it definitely felt good. Seeing my staff getting back into work, that was the biggest thing for me, knowing that they can then support themselves and their families, that was big. But yeah, I don't really know, what's next for me. But like I said, having my staff back is seeing them happy and back in work is definitely makes me happy.
Well, as the orchestrator of probably the most gastropubs in the country and the food that's offered, I can't let you go without asking you what your ultimate pub meal is.
My ultimate pub meal, a good bloody pie, I reckon. I'm a sucker for it. But I actually just started, I've been doing a lot of travel for work, and I've started a little country pie report for every little town that I go into. But yeah, like a good pie mash, like a good pub pie, or a good steak tartare or something is nothing beats a good bangers and mash, any of that sort of old nostalgia food.
Well, I tend to agree with you, Telina, and it's been amazing having you share your story on Deep in the Weeds today, and particularly the changes that you've had in regards to cooking and the focus about helping disadvantaged youth. I think I'd love to catch up with you down the track about that and see how that's going. Please keep in touch, and thanks for being on Deep in the Weeds.
Thanks, Huck. It's been a pleasure.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we share the stories of Australia's hospo community, suppliers and producers in search of hope during this pandemic. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.